hopefully that helps out. But what we're going to do now is we're going to segue into something that's going to really give you a big advantage on this. That's actually maintaining, cleaning your axles, keeping them greased so they work a little easier for you. Yes?
Before you go on, I noticed, and you may have already addressed this, but I noticed as you were taking the tire off, you had the the brake rotor on the top side. Is there a reason why?
Ideally, the reason why you want to shoot for that, it's not always going to happen, but the reason you want to shoot for that is because the sprocket side is larger in diameter and it's a lot harder to spoon around that area. So if say your tire is completely unbeaded completely, I'm actually going to bead the sprocket side first, and then I'll put the sprocket side down and I'll work it off the rotor side because that's a smaller circumference in that area and it's easier to work your tire irons and your spoons in the direction you want to go versus fighting around that big gnarly sprocket section right there. So hopefully that helps out a little bit and just makes it a little easier. So sometimes it doesn't always happen in that direction, but that's kind of ideal how it works out.
So for lubricant, is water the best or grease?
You know, ideally you don't want to use grease because grease isn't going to evaporate, and then it's always going to have this constant slick surface where your tire is going to slip all the time on the rim. So,
is there any other things that you would use that would be better than water, or is it water the
you know, water works out pretty good. You can use baby powder if you're at home and just kind of fiddling around with it. That's usually what I use when I'm at home. Or there's actually a tire lubricant that we use. It kind of makes it a little soapy, but it dries up and goes away after a while. So there's a lot of your tire shops will be using that kind of material when if you see them with a spray bottle or with their little bottle brushes that they're wiping around the rim. That's typically what they're using. It's kind of a soapy lubricant type of material.
I was just wondering because if it's something better, if it's small, we can pack, and I'll pack it.
Honestly, I wouldn't get too deep in the weeds on that. I just bottle water, you'll be fine. So yeah, that's yeah, exactly. Because really, I mean, the only thing you're going to gain advantage of, it's a little more slickery, but you're packing more weight with you. So it's, I mean, it might be a couple ounces, but like I said, ounces and grams make pounds. So if you can keep that trimmed down, you're a lot better off on that. So, awesome. Well, good deal. Well, once we cinch that up, then we can get rocking and rolling here. So what we're going to do now, I'm actually just going to kind of pull some of my goodies out of the way here.
We have a guy who asked, do you prefer tube over tubeless?
Yes, I do. Okay, there's some advantages over tubes where if you got a tube, it's 18 to 20 bucks. Tubeless systems, you're looking at quite a bit more. Okay, I know most shops that work on tubeless systems, they will charge you quite a bit more. We install them. Some people like them. I personally don't, so I don't run with them. I see a lot of people spending more time in figuring out why their tires are leaking versus riding. So if you prefer them, great, and maybe you're getting some good advantages out of them. For the situations that I ride in, it's not necessary, but...
Are there weight differences between tube and tubeless?
The tubeless weighs a little bit more because you actually have two tubes in there, so they're technically not tubeless. They're kind of diaphragms in there, some things... The ride differences, you can drop the pressures down quite a bit on the tubeless systems. That's one of the things I hear quite a bit from the pilots that do ride those. They can really drop them down. So, because these guys are doing a lot of really hardcore enduro riding, really going up some Erzberg trails and stuff like that. So they're going up some nasty stuff. So some of it gives them advantage. Honestly, any pro rider that I know, they run with either moose bibs, which is basically a foam tube in there, or they run heavy duty tubes in.
So that's a question from Scott. So thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Yeah, good question. It's look at what your budget is. I know the tubeless systems, you're going to be spending a lot of money on just getting them set up and riding, and then hopefully they stay dialed for you, because they are a little finicky. You're not going to lie. You have to have a completely cleaned, prepped wheel to go with those. Some of the textured wheels don't like the tubeless systems. So if you got more of a smoothie finish, you're a lot better off. Some of the textured wheels, they just don't seal up as well on those tubeless systems. So, but honestly, if I'm gonna go on a big long ride, I'll just run Moose bibs, and that way I don't have to worry about any punctures or anything like that. They do weigh a little bit more, but you don't have to worry about getting any flats or anything like that too. So, and then usually when you change out a Moose bib, the structure of them gets a little tired and starts kind of caving in on itself. So just change it out when you change your tire and put new tires on it, and you're good to go. So, and you don't have to worry about flats again. Awesome, great questions. Sweet stuff. So what we're gonna do now is basically, I'm just gonna put this little rascal up on a stand, because not all of us have the advantage of having lifts at home. All right, so got our handy stand here. Hopefully, if you've got a dirt bike, you've got one of these. Get that set up. All right. This is actually why I didn't tighten this down, because we're going to pull this back off again. So one thing that makes life a lot easier for us is clean goodies. If we notice right here, we've got a lot of dirt crud built up, even on the chain side. It makes it a little more difficult to get that axle out. And I'll actually show you why this axle is being so hard to take out. I'm a firm believer in a clean bike is a happy bike, and then we get to go out and take it and get dirty again. So what is going on this particular machine? Yeah, it's still fighting a little bit. There we go. So where we're having our issues is all this crud that's built up all along right here, and that's why it wants to stick on us when we're trying to throw our axles in and out on that wheel. So we're just going to do a quick little cleaning process on it, make it super easy, very minimal supplies that you need to actually do this. So I'm just going to grab my little cleaning agent over here. Basically just brake clean, carb clean, anything that's going to clean off all that grease and gunk and dirt. And maybe if you're spoiled, you have a solvent tank at home, you can get really crazy with it. So we're just going to clean all that stuff off. Now, if you come across some rust deposits on your axle here, especially on some earlier model bikes, you can actually start to see where some of the halo areas from where the bearings are riding at. Sometimes those will get a little buildup of rust or whatnot. Just take some Scotch-Brite and clean all that off. If you've got a wire wheel on a bench grinder, just give it a little dress all the way through, and that way it's nice and clean and fresh again. So once we've got that addressed, then we're going to take our adjuster plates and do the same thing. Get all the pockets cleared out, get all the gunk cleared out. Now, one thing I would recommend, because I've actually had to replace swing arms because of this, is if you haven't messed with your adjusters too often, back those all the way out, re-lube them, and then turn them back in to where they're working nice and clean for you. I've had these bolts seize up on clients' bikes to where there was no way to get them out. There's no access point to lubricate them. We had to replace the whole swing arm just because you couldn't get those out. So keep things moving on your bike. We're out playing in the dirt and the crud and all that stuff, so it's definitely a big advantage to go through and just save yourself some grief. I mean, you can spend 15 minutes on just cleaning your axle assemblies versus purchasing a whole new swing arm just on simple maintenance like this. So I like to just take some cleaner, get in these grooves here, get everything cleaned out. I'm actually going to pull the wheel off so we can get in some of those grooves here. Then you can get inside your adjuster plates here and the back side, all that built up crud and everything. Basically, it just kind of acts as sandpaper and it wears on things after a while. So it's a good idea to go in, clean all these areas off, get into all the nitty-gritty. Same on your brake caliper. Slide that off. You can see all that buildup of crud right there. And it feels very, very smooth, but it's basically like graphite wearing on all your assembly pieces and just wearing down on everything. Back in here, that way your axles slide. And that's where a big cause of that axle fightiness is just these little dirty components in here. And this is all the stuff we can do while we're sitting at home watching the snow fly. It's raining like crazy here tonight, so this is something I'd be doing at home on my bike. So now that's all addressed right there. Let's kind of talk about your brake calipers. So these get really dirty and crudded up. One thing you can do, a 5-gallon bucket, some hot water and simple green, and I know everyone's got to use toothbrush at home, okay? So you can actually take your brake pads out and really get in there with just a simple toothbrush with hot water and simple green, get all that cleaned out, and that way that brake's gonna function for you properly. It's not pulling in crud, not beating up your brake caliper seals. You can also very carefully, this is where your piston for your brake caliper is. So if we actually pressed on the brake pedal, that piston comes out, presses on this brake pad and pushes a little more to this direction. If you pull your brake pads out, then you can very carefully press on your brake pedal or your lever, and you can push that piston out a little bit. Don't go crazy, because if you'll blow your piston out, then you've got to work it all back in there and re-bleed your brakes. But you can kind of sneak that out a little bit, and then you can get a little more around that surface area of your piston. A little WD-40 just to kind of lubricate the piston ring itself on that seal, and then you can get it all assembled out. Make sure that when you are putting it back together that you've cleared out any of that WD-40 in there. That way it doesn't contaminate your brake pad or your rotor. Okay? But simple green and hot water works great. If you have an air compressor and you're going to blow it out to dry it out, take your air back about a foot, because if you drive that air into those seals, you'll end up pushing air into your brake caliper. So just keep that air stood off of your brake caliper when you are blowing it off. That way that doesn't push it back through there, okay? So just something you can sit on your little stool and do a little cleaning and brushing and just keep them happy. That way everything's working properly for you. Nothing's getting bound up or anything like that, okay? So as far as your axle, gonna grab a little bit of grease. Yes.
Go on, Rob.
Yes.
The axle, you mentioned about the rust and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming it will wear out.
Honestly,
how do you know if it's
that's a great question. The reason I see axles wear out usually is from lack of maintenance, lack of cleaning them. It's all that crud and grime that gets all built up on them, and it's just constantly wearing on it all the time. So if you can just pull them out occasionally, I mean, we've got usually about 4 or 5 months out of the year that's completely cold and trashed out. We're not riding our bikes, so take 15 minutes out of your day and go clean your axles out and just make sure they're clean. Usually where I worry about them being worn out, kind of back on that topic, is where you see big dishing right here, right in the axles where those wheel bearings are going to sit. So these are nice and smooth, no issues right there. Even if you find that you've got maybe a little bit of just haze rust built up on it, totally okay if you just clean it up with wire brush on your wheel or some Scotch-Brite and get that all cleaned off. If it's not really gouged out and pitted, you're totally fine on it. A lot of that's just surface. Ticking bearings, yeah. Oh, checking bearings. Oh, excellent question. So, really easy. So what you want to do when you're checking your bearings, a lot of times I'll actually check it, just do a good check out with the bike on, mounted up on the bike. And the way we can do that, set that right there. If you can take someone, get a little weight on the back end or where one tire's off the ground, and you can actually move it laterally this way and this way on top to bottom. If you're finding any play right there, that's where we want to replace those bearings. And then if you're any question on it, you can actually do more of a handheld manipulation. I'll show you that here in a second. Another thing you want to check is your steering head bearings, okay? I actually just serviced my steering head bearings on my bike last weekend. So what you want to do is you want to get the front end of the bike off the ground, take a little, just hold the bike here to where you've got some mechanical leverage, and all you're going to do is pull the wheel this way or this way and see if you've got any slack or play. If you feel that play, then it's time to definitely address those steering head bearings. Maybe next time when we have a little extra time, we can dig into that, and because it goes a little more in depth, and I can show you some cool, bearing maintenance, all that. In fact, when I did mine, my bearings were dry, but they're still in great shape. They just hadn't been serviced from the previous owner. So I just repacked all the bearings. They feel awesome, and I didn't have to go spend 50 bucks on a new set of bearings. So that works out pretty good. So you just serviced your bike and save yourself some money in the process. So it works out a little better that way. If you ever need any of this stuff that maybe you don't have the tools or anything, definitely, if you're in the area, stop on by the Edge Power Sports, and we can definitely help you out with any of this stuff. More than happy to give you tips and help you out with any of that, and get you just to where you're having a good, safe ride out there as well. So awesome, good deal. As far as the back wheel, this one I usually have a little easier time of figuring out if the wheel bearings are shot. Just while it's sitting here, you can actually just take the wheel like that and rock it back and forth, and if you feel any play, it's time to replace them. Or what you can do, just a simple check while your spacers are out. These ones are still in there. You can actually feel these. So what I usually do is I'll just do a little hand roll like that, and if it feels like you've got a box of marbles in there, it's definitely time to change those out. You'll feel them, they'll feel a little crunchy and just not rotating smooth. So those are some things you can definitely do on that part, okay? Now, while we're kind of on that topic, I'm actually gonna pull these spacers out so we can see some of the advantages on maintaining that. The Husky and the KTM and the gas spacers, they usually stay pretty secure in there, but some other models don't, and they actually, you can get a little bit of contamination in there. So I'm just gonna sneak those out really quick. And we'll go over doing a little bit of maintenance on these. Pretty simple stuff. There we go. All right, so if we look right in here, in fact, if we take a really close look, we can see how this wheel seal, it's completely bone dry. There's no lubricant in there at all. So it's basically, if any water splashes in there or anything, the only thing that's really holding it back is the rubber. There's no oil or anything like that sealing that up. So here's where you want to actually just take the time. We're going to clean our wheel seal. And like I said, carb cleaner, maybe some brake clean, something like that. Just somewhere it's going to clean up some of that oil or junk. Get all cleaned out there. If you can, maybe get your finger in there and clean out the inner race in case there's any crud in there. You can see a little bit of built up in there. So once we're at that point, basically we're just gonna take this is just normal waterproof grease. We sell this product at our shop here. And then this is just a little acid brush that you can pick up at like Harbor Freight or something like that. I've got a packet of about 40 of them in there. Cost you a couple bucks. And I just cut a hole in the top of my grease container here. It's gonna take a little dab. What we're gonna do is just wick it in there. And that's gonna help keep any water or moisture, say we're ripping through a river or anything like that, some really heavy crud, that's gonna help keep that out and keep those bearings in good shape too. So then you definitely wanna do that with your wheel spacer. And I know I'm not using gloves. If you want to use gloves, go for it. I just was a little lazy on grabbing my latex gloves right now. And one thing you want to be mindful of is on your wheel spacer, make sure there's no grooves or nicks or anything inside that, because that's going to bind your axle up when you go to manipulate that through. So always make sure that's working nice and clean. You can do a little dry fit, just make sure it's good. So once you know you're good there, maybe just do a little dabby right there just to kind of keep it dressed up. Really kind of depends on the style of your wheel spacer. And just pop that in there and do the same thing on the other side. All right. And as far as your axle goes, usually just take a little glaze. That's why I like the acid brush, because you can just kind of brush it on there instead of getting goopy with your hands. Like so. Then once you've maintained your caliper and got that all Scooby clean, I'm gonna put that back on. And these, like I said, this is all stuff we can take care of while we're on our downtime. We got an afternoon to kill, staring at our bike in the garage. Yeah, it's all very minimal cost, it's just more time than anything. I think that are the most expensive things we're playing with here today. So we're gonna get that stuff back up in there. And here's where we're gonna see the big advantage now. Now that we've got everything lubricated up, you saw how hard I fought that axle in before. Get the right direction here. Now I put that in the palm of my hand. Didn't need any rubber mallets or anything like that. So think about that when you're out on the trail on a really gummed up axle that's just fighting you the whole way. That's just gonna give you more grief. So if you can take care of this stuff while you're in your garage, takes 15, 20 minutes. If you're messing around, maybe watching some motocross or something on the TV, maybe it takes you a couple hours. Big deal. You get to spend time with your bike and do some stuff with it. Okay, here's another thing I run across all the time. I don't know why this happens, but notice on this particular model, on the spacer plate, there's a pocket on one side. That's for the axle nut, okay? Time and time again, I run into that. So when you put your axle nut on, you're only hanging on by about 3 or 4 threads. So when you are assembling your rear axle, make sure that you're assembling it properly. Just like that. That way that nut's fitting in there properly. You've got all the threads you need on there. And then you're good to go. Yeah, some bikes are built like that, to where be really mindful of how it comes apart, and just take a good look at it and make sure that you're assembling it properly, because you might be putting that rascal back together and not realize there's one minor thing that's not right. It could be dramatic out on the trail. So yeah, definitely take the time to just take a couple moments if you need to. We've all got cell phones in our pockets. You can take mad pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. No pride lost or anything like that. I've always constantly taken pictures and referring back to them on machines that I work on. So a good visual record. And it never fails, especially when you're working on wiring harnesses. You always miss that one section right out of your picture that you need to see. So that's just how it goes. But yeah, that helps out quite a bit. Any questions on any of that?
So you're on the trail and you just fix your tire, you put it back on. You don't have a torque wrench or anything like that. When you tighten it, how do you know?
I would say just a good firm snug fit at this point. If I'm just trying to get myself back on the trail, I'm not over worried about torque specs or anything. I just want to snug it up enough to
How do you know though that it's tight enough? Is there
Oh, okay. Well, so let me grab my little spanner tool here. This is going to seem very vague, but basically you're going to tighten that rascal up till you got a good firm snug like that, and you can tell it's pretty tight. I know I'm good to get home. So that's I mean, I'm not like cranking down to where I'm like trying to bust threads or anything like that, but I know it's snug enough to where it's firm, it's not going to come off on the trail. And then when you get home, you might need to pull some things apart. If you know you assembled it properly on the trail, maybe just break some things loose when you get back home and retorque it to a proper spec, and then you're good to go from there. Awesome, good stuff, great questions. One other thing I do want to point out, just kind of making sure that all your tools are in good shape. Also, your axles and everything are in good shape. Some of your axle nuts might protrude through your nut. It might not be a hat style like that. So one thing that you might want to take care of while you are in the garage is sometimes the side of your axle will take a gainer on a rock or something and really junk these threads up to where it's completely impossible to get that nut on or off. So that's definitely something you want to be mindful of in your garage versus out on the trail too, because if you can't get that nut off, then you're leaving your bike there, or a pretty bad day right there. So just make sure things are clean and in good shape. If you have to replace an axle, it stinks, but sometimes you have to replace axles. There are some thread files out there that you can get. A lot of your high-end tool trucks that run around, they'll have good kits on there that you can actually go through and clean those threads up versus actually having to replace the whole axle on it. So just some handy tools to have in the garage, just to where it makes you a stronger mechanic on your own too. So those are some things I kind of look for on that part of it. And then as far as chain tension, that, like I said, those didn't really get changed, so we don't have to worry about that. That was the other thing I want to talk about, is the position of your axle nut. Notice it's on the right side. You're going to get some motorcycles that you're going to find the axle nut on that side. A lot of times it's, and you'll find this more in the street bike world, it's a lot of times because that exhaust is hanging down lower and it's harder to manipulate that wrench. Well, the kink to that, in fact, we do it a lot. It's called an axle flip. You actually take your axle and flip it over to the proper side, because if it's on this side, when you're trying to tighten up the nut, it pulls your wheel off of your wheel adjusters, your chain adjusters. So if you can flip it over and it's not going to change anything mechanically, I would definitely recommend it, because then when you tighten that nut up, it's always going to draw that wheel up to your wheels, your spacers right there, and that way it's always going to be adjusted properly. So just a little tech tip that I run into a lot. So if your nut's on this side, maybe flip it over. That might give you a little bit of better advantage on that too. Good deal. Well, sweet, gang. Trying to think of anything else we can talk about here. If you want to get really crazy, you can actually go through while your tire's out. You can actually pull your shock out, lube up all your pivot points on your shock, and that way everything's working clean and glossy on that part of it too. My engine is actually out of my bike at home right now, so that gave me the advantage of pulling the whole swing arm out, lubricating all those pivot points there. Sometimes the bearings inside your swing arm will get a little dried out, so it's a good idea to get in there, use a little acid brush, get all that worked in there, and I'll actually physically get in there and press the grease into those bearings, because they're more kind of a needle bearing in those instead of a ball bearing. So sometimes you have to work some of that grease up in there and just get it to where it's nice and fresh. So if you want to dive into it a little deeper on that, I would definitely recommend it on earlier model bikes. My particular bike is an 07, so it was time. I mean, it's got some miles on it, and definitely time to address those. And that way everything's going to pivot properly for you. The suspension is going to work properly for you. A lot of people don't realize when you have bindy suspension parts, your suspension shocks and forks aren't going to work properly because those other parts aren't pivoting properly as well. So if you keep everything working slickery and smooth, it works a lot better for you. So that's kind of how I look at it. So, well, good deal. Well, I think that kind of finishes our tutorial on changing out tubes. keeping our axles greased and maintained properly. Maybe take the time on going through and hitting those calipers up too with a little toothbrush. If you don't have a used toothbrush, I know a lot of your hardware stores and auto parts stores, they'll have little plastic brush toothbrushes, maybe a little coarser than your regular one that you stuff in your head, and that might work a little easier in getting some of that crud and grime out of there. Like I said, Simple Green and hot water works out really good, or Simple Green or hot water and dish soap work really good too. If you've got the time, a little detailing trick, you can actually take WD-40 and hose down your entire hub assembly, let it sit overnight. WD-40 is actually a mild solvent. It'll make your rear hub assembly look like brand new. The only problem is don't get it all over your brake assembly, because then you've contaminated your brake pads and you got to replace those. But just a detailing trick. I've done it on my swing arms. You can hose all that down and just let it sit overnight. You get back there, scrub it all off, and you pretty much have a new looking swing arm. Just little things like that help out. But like I said, a clean bike's a happy bike. Keep everything lubricated and it'll work for you in the long run. And you can keep these bikes almost forever, pretty much give them to your kids after you're done with it. So, well, cool, gang. I hope that helps out. I hope those little tips and tricks helps out. I hope there wasn't a big delay on getting us fired up tonight, and everyone got some good information out of it. So hopefully see you next time. I've been talking with a few of the folks on the community here. Hopefully it's a little stretched down the road, but in May we're gonna maybe bring you out on the track and let you experience some supermoto racing with us, and kind of dive into some of the little tidbits on how a supermoto bike is set up versus a full-blown dirt bike is set up. So hopefully that'll be a lot of fun too. So, well, awesome, gang. Well, hope you have a great night. Stay warm and dry out there. Hope you had an amazing Christmas with your family and a happy New Year, and take care. We'll see you next time.